Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I just want to say a quick announcement. So, after so many of you have asked for it, I have finally managed to open my PO box. So if anyone here would like to send me anything, and please don't feel obligated to do so, you will be able to find all the information in the description. So, if you like sending stuff, go nuts. But anyway, without further ado, it's time to dive into the world of Skinwalkers. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I am Varmint Control for ranches with free-range cattle. I work about 2 hours south of Tucson in the Sky Island. I arrived and parked my vehicle at the mouth of a small canyon and set up shelter about 10 feet away. Approximately 1 hour before sunset, I made dinner, chatted on the CB with other hunters, and set up my area. I hung out and read a book until about 9. At the time, I heard noise from the canyon. At the mouth, you could see 15 feet in, and then it took a sharp right. The walls were about 12 feet high, but I heard the noise. It sounded like it was coming from way deeper in the canyon. It was a repetitive clacking noise, like someone had sticks and kept hitting them together. It did not stop. At least, I fell asleep to the noise, with my rifle at my side. I woke up at 4 AM sharp, had some breakfast, and got ready to head out. I locked my truck and clubbed the steering wheel, and I was off. I walked about 3 miles from the mountain and found a high hill. It was covered in white quartz and had massive veins of mica, and was definitely a sight to behold. By the time I arrived to the hill, the sun was up and the coyotes were yapping. I called and laid there motionless for 2 hours. Nothing. I watched a small bug crawl on my scope and fly away. Then, that's when I noticed movement about 270 yards away. It was a single coyote, diseased. I zeroed in on it and noticed that it was walking funny. It was walking leading with its right shoulder, and its head bobbed up and down a little too much. I figured I'd put the poor thing out of its misery. I took aim and squeezed. It connected and it went down. I walked over to collect the animal, and when I got to the spot, I didn't see it. I swear that's where it fell, 3 yards from the sideways barrel cactus. I saw no blood and no trail, just silence. I knew I hit it, and I watched it go down. I saw it. I searched for 30 minutes and saw nothing that led me to the animal. Shit. There went my $40. I called it a day. It was getting a little warm, and my arms were sore from my rifle. So I hoofed it back, slowly in case I ran into another. I made it back to my campsite, and saw something that made my blood run cold. My camping stool, that was in the bed of my truck, was set facing in the maw of the canyon, dead center of the entrance. In the shade of the walls. That's when I heard it again, the clacking. This time it sounded closer, as if it were right at the bend of the canyon, as if whatever it was that was doing it was hiding right behind the turn. I didn't dare to grab my chair. It was $10 at the swap meet. I thought about firing a round into the canyon. but I figured it wouldn't do much. I rolled up my tent, keeping a sharp eye on the canyon. At this point, the clacking would stop every time I stopped, and I would watch and listen. When I would go back to loading my truck, it would start right back up again. I packed my tent, tossed it in the bed, grabbed my lantern and my propane stove, and put them in the bed as well. I put my rifle away. I still had my 1911 at my hip, but I still didn't feel safe. I jumped in my truck and started it. I watched the canyon. Nothing. Not a sound. Just the low rumble from the cold started truck. I let her run a bit and warm up. At this time, the canyon was filled with sunlight, and it was noonish. I felt a sense of bravery and wanted to take a quick peek around the bend of the canyon. So I let my truck run, grabbed my pistol, and approached the canyon. I stood at the mouth, listening for any shuffling, clacking, but there was nothing. It was bright from the sun, and I led with my gun. I stood about 5 feet away from the end, unsure what was waiting on the other side. I thought to myself to just grab the chair and book, but I needed to know. I leaned slowly around the corner and saw nothing. It went about 20 feet in, and then was a dead end. I did notice animal tracks, hoof marks and coyote tracks. I didn't notice any animals during my stay, and these prints looked very fresh. I stood at the corner facing down at the dead end. 2 very smooth rocks lay at my feet. They did not look of the region. They were light red and smooth, as if they were from the rivers. I turned away and grabbed my chair and drove off. It felt as though I were being watched. I swear there were eyes on me, and they knew I knew. Like they were the mouse and I was the cat. However, I wouldn't chase. Now I've encountered relics of Native American tribes in the area. Old clay pots, napped tools, smooth stones to grind grains. But I had thought the tribes were long gone. I spoke to a good friend of mine, a fellow I call Hugh. His last name was Huerta. He came from the lines of tribe members. His mother and his grandparents were 100% Pasqua blood. His father was Mixtec. He spoke of the medicine men that would curse animals and were said to be shapeshifters, evil beings that were turned the wrong way from the magic. He said what I had experienced was one of the spirits playing games with me to get me away from their lands. He said he'll have his abuelo pray for me, and that I should stay the night at his parents' house because it was blessed, and that I would be safe. So I did. A few weeks later, me and my friend Hugh had a day in our schedule where we both had free time. We made the day and headed out to the spot and maybe look for clues or see if the rocks were still there. Hugh said that his elders would disapprove of this because it attracts bad spirits when one messes with them. He felt like the area needed closure, that a prayer would maybe cleanse the spot of the evil. So, we made a lunch, loaded some supplies and headed out there at 2:30 a.m. We arrived just as the sky began to light up. It was still dark, but the east sky was waking up. I drove and stopped the truck about 300 yards from the canyon. It was silent in the desert. Not even a cricket was chirping. No birds were singing. No coyotes were laughing. It was dead quiet. "We are being watched," said Hugh. "We are not of the area, and they know it. He had a way of speaking in riddles that was very poetic. No wonder he had trouble getting dates. We hiked to the area. We arrived at my campsite, and my firing was still there. There were animal tracks going into a circle of the firing, as if the animals were dancing around the ring. It was almost too perfect and planned. I was scared. Hugh seemed at peace. I watched his face, and I felt safe with him. At this point there was light, but the sun was still hiding behind the mountains to the east. It was still quiet. Hugh made his way over to the canyon, and stood at the mouth, and looked on it. He had a small leather pouch with him. It had herbs and some local plant life deemed medicinal by his people. He tied the pouch to a saguaro rib and rested the staff at the edge of the canyon, at the mouth of whatever it was home. He spoke in a tongue I didn't know. He sat in the dirt and he prayed. He stood up and raised his arms to the sky. I felt lighter after that. I felt as though this fog was lifted. Almost immediately, I heard birds and crickets. It may have been the sun rising, but to me it seemed his prayers shooed the fog away. It seems almost fairy tale what happened that morning, but my parents have told me that Native American magic is not something to play with, that they themselves have experienced weird goings-on when they travelled to native lands. My father is a Christian to the max, but he still believes that evil lurks within corrupted native spirits. It's maybe that we live in the Southwest and we grew up with those stories, but I'm not sure. Hugh was struck for a nasty flu 2 days after the encounter. He was bedridden for a week and was cared for by his grandmother. I visited him every day. I was told he was being attacked by the spirit for intruding on its territory. It was flu season, but it seemed very well timed. He was treated with herbs and prayers, and I chalked it up to him having a badass immune system, but I digress. He tells me to this day that we should never go to the area to challenge whatever it was, that it's a force beyond us, and that we can't do anything about it. His family tells me not to return to the spot because the evil will follow me and that it will remember my face, and they prayed so that it might forget it. The Navajo may disagree with historians on the Anasazi's origins and departure, according to Navajo legend, that they simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind plates, dishes, and food, and went into another dimension, or some equivalent. But whatever the history, the Navajo did not take like to wandering into Anasazi ruins. I never asked why, but figured it had something to do with disrespect, preserving history, and the like. As such, none of the others cared a bit about these canyon ruins. They were more interested in shooting pistols. I could see old beds, ladders, and even cave drawings on the cliffs with my naked eye, and I got a strange fixation on going over there. I'm not Navajo, and felt the rules didn't apply to me. I set off down the cliffs without a rope, and decided I would climb down across the canyon floor, and then climb back up. This was a bad idea for millions of reasons, but it was like some obsession. I couldn't explain the feeling. It was like magnetism. I wanted to be in those ruins, and it wasn't just some touristy-like curiosity. It felt like I was meant to go there. I kept slipping and getting stuck on the rocks, and I was so frustrated, I almost started to cry. Finally, I was deterred by the unmistakable sound of a growl coming from the canyon floor below me. There were trees down there, so I couldn't see what was making the growl, but mountain lion immediately rose to mind, and I got my ass back up the cliff. I said nothing to the others, and we shot the guns for a while. The only strange occurrence was while Sarah was aiming. They got eerie quiet. We all heard a sound from behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was almost a growl, then a hoarse laugh, almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area, and there was nothing there. Certainly not on the cliff tops, where we had heard it anyway. The creepy part was that David, Sarah, and I heard it from a close distance, but Luke heard it as if it were right next to his ear. We ended up camping out there to see if anything would happen, and this is when I got completely terrified. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. We had guns though, and were sleeping with no bags or tents, just some blankets under the stars and a little fire, so I felt safe when we all laid down. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up a few hours later to see everyone else laying with their eyes wide open, listening. The canyon was completely full of noises. The only way to describe it was people banging rocks together. There would be one set maybe 300 yards away, and another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 yards away. The canyon echoes so well that it's very hard to determine how many rock smashing noises there were, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened to this for about 10 minutes, and no other animal noises or nothing appeared during that time. Finally, David, who was kind of a hard ass and the least superstitious of his family, shouted, "Just shut up." And everything immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at each other, wide-eyed. It was dead quiet. And then we heard another super weird noise from the Anasazi ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it sounded kind of like a zebra noise, like these squeaky trills. It got louder, and then the rock/sticks/whatever started up again. But this was worse, because now other animal noises came. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching. In my opinion, these were the most terrifying. Owls hooting. And throughout all of that, the terrible zebra noise. We said nope, and got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse the fire, pack our blankets, and speed away. And the noises were continuing the entire time. That night, I was obviously pretty shaken up. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat with me. She said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit to avoid a lecture about messing with the spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal, I feel like. I wanted to go there. Why couldn't I? It would have been beautiful. And after I told her all about it, I could see that she had a really concerned look on her face. "What is it?" I asked. Totally confused, she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to lure people. When they get up on the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. The town has a public access kiva, kind of a tourist trap for a little podunk place. But since I didn't see the ruins up close, I went down into the kiva, and I went alone. And of course my superstitious family refused to enter the natives' dwellings. I figured nothing could push me off a cliff if I was in a kiva. I was right, but something worse happened. Fast forward a few weeks later. I worked at a shitty call center in Salt Lake City on the 3rd shift. It was my first night alone, and I was feeling jumpy ever since the kiva. My brothers already warned me that I had a skinwalker following me, but of course I didn't believe it. I don't smoke, but I followed my co-workers out to smoke, because I like to chat. Tonight I lurked in the doorway, because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out the glass door and being a total weirdo, and it hit me how paranoid I had been. That's what skinwalkers do. They mess with your mind. While I was pacing in front of the glass doors, I decided the whole thing was stupid, and I was going outside, and I stood there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filing back in, but I walked out and put my hands in my pockets. I looked at the sky and looked in the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something that I will never be able to give a rational explanation, or even halfway accountable explanation for. We have around 6 parking lots. In one of the lots, far away, maybe 100 feet away, I could see something walking. It was a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping and walked like if it was hurt or tired. Animal lover me forgot about the skinwalkers, and I started to walk towards it. I was making the "come here doggy" noises, and then I stopped abruptly. The dog had the body form of a greyhound, and it was grey, but there was something very wrong with it. It had bloody legs and limped, but it walked like a person would walk on feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and fro, and made no sense. When it heard me, it just stopped without turning, something I've never known a dog to do. And it finally looks over its shoulder at me, and this is the freaky part. The dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were bared, like it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was more like a whistle than a growl. Noises no regular animals make. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk to me, or was taunting me. Somehow, in the middle of all of this, I realized it didn't have a tail, and I heard from all the Navajo stories that skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Forgetting all logic and rationality, I turned and jetted. I didn't look back until I was back inside the building and had pulled the door shut behind me. And then, when I looked, of course the thing was gone. When I described this to my brother, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker. They went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, them, and their apartments. I never saw the creepy dog again, and I have never since, even remotely, wanted to visit those cliff ruins. I don't know how to begin here, but you can just call me Chop. The story I'm going to share with you took place almost 10 years ago, July of 2008. It happened in Central Virginia, before I got into trucking. Let me start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my closest friend, Tick. You never saw one of us without the other, and we're the two main people involved in the story. I'm bald, tattooed, 6'1" and 250 pounds. I have a beard, and I often look quite intimidating. I don't know. I guess it's just how my face is arranged and my size. But truth is, I can be just as nice and look mean, and vice versa. Tick is like a miniature version of me. 5'7", 160 pounds, but appears much more friendly. We also live in a southern town that's 50-50 on the Second Amendment socially, but 100% legally. So him and I have our fair share of unorthodox weaponry and equipment. Because, well, why not? I mean, if a situation ever arose where we needed it, great. If not, well, it can be a lot of fun to look badass anyway. So don't judge us. I get we look like crazed anti-government preppers, but we're just good old boys. He and I carry daily, both Glocks 19s, but I also carry a 380 on my ankle as a backup, unless we're heading off trekking through the woods, which we did often, in which case we suit up in full tactical gear. I'm talking tac vest, AR-15 for me, civilian model AK-47 for him, our sidearms 2 ways. You know, all the bells and whistles that says excessive needless spending. Now that that's out of the way, onto the story, which takes place over a week in the summer. Tick and I had been working in my garage at my house, which is located in a pretty residential area. Most of the day, we had been repairing another friend's wrecked motorcycle as best we could. We had smoked a bowl or two throughout the day while working, and jamming out, so we were slightly buzzed, but weren't stoned. We'd just been enjoying the day and the job at hand. Before we knew it, night had fallen, and out of nowhere, it seemed like every dog and cat in hearing distance went off simultaneously, barking, hissing, crawling. All the animals were going loopy. Strangest damn thing I've ever heard. So we cut the radio off and opened the garage door to look down the driveway, which looked straight past the house to the street, the animals seeming to echo throughout the neighborhood and beyond. We just sat there listening for 3 to 4 minutes, when an even louder creature made a snarl that was easily heard over the rest of the animals. Whatever it was, sounded huge and deep, and unlike anything I'd ever heard. Everything went silent upon its snarl. No bugs, no birds, nothing. Tick and I stood there confused, looking at each other. What the hell was that? No idea. It was a wide-eyed convo that I assume normal people would have. We then hear what seemed to be something tearing through the woods behind my house. So instinctively, we grabbed our Glocks and headed around the front of the house so that we could peer around the corner and into the tree line. The moonlight spread through the yard, but the tree line was pitch black. There was a huge oak tree, about 20 feet inside the wood line, where Tick and I had made a small fire pit and would hang our hunting souvenirs around it, as sort of trophies, along with a few trinkets we had whenever we'd stumbled across an abandoned building while walking through the woods. This tree began to shake violently. You could have hit that thing with a loaded dump truck and it wouldn't have budged. So I didn't know what could be shaking the shit out of this tree. Guns up to the tree, and we begin to move towards it. Tick steps on something that makes a crunch. Twigs. I don't quite remember what exactly, but the point is he made a noise, and the tree stopped shaking. As I was in front and took a knee gun, still trained into the forest, so Tick could easily scoot around over me if need be. But nothing. Dead silence. Then, in an instant, for a second, we saw orangish eyes, tall as hell, peer through the darkness. Then it was gone as fast as it appeared. And, just like that, the bugs and crickets were back to chirping, and all was normal again. We decided to go inside the house, hunker down, burn one out, and pass out, and check it out in the daylight. The next day we headed out into the woods, and nothing. No trails, no tracks. Some broken limbs and a decent storm came through, but nothing else. So we said screw it. It was a weird, probably once-in-a-lifetime experience. So we laughed about it and went on with our day. We went over to Tick's house in the country to do some target shooting and blow some stuff up with tannerite, exploding targets. While shooting, a deer walked into the field and was unfazed by the sound of gunfire. Here we were at weird shit number 2 for the week. Not quite hunting season. We weren't going to shoot this thing, so we fired a few warning shots around it, and it stood there like we didn't exist. So what did 2 logical thinking country boys do? If you said grab their shotguns and move in for a closer look, you'd be right. We got about 15 feet from this thing, when it shakily turned its head. Eyes glazed, white tongue, drool dripping from its lips, like something straight out of a crappy zombie movie. We put it down with 2 slugs, one in the chest, one above the right front shoulder, one to the head. The wounds didn't bleed. It seemed full of fluid. So you're welcome, world, for us saving you on the deer zombie apocalypse. But that wasn't even the case. Even though Tick and I had hoped about it the rest of the day, talking about it being weirder than the evening before, while we skinned this thing and planned to use the bad meat as bait for coyotes over the weekend. We took the remains of the carcasses down to the woods, behind his house under a railroad tussle, to dispose of what we couldn't use for predator hunting. In a few days, after disposing the body, we headed to my house for the evening. Clean out our guns and talk about the weird shit, and play a few games or 2, and burn one, and try to have a normal Wednesday. Mind you, my house was a good 20 miles from Tick's. Anyway, the morning we awoke to the deer carcass we disposed of at Tick's, placed in my front yard, at the foot of my front porch. Cue, what the hells, and how the hells? Well, the day went on and nothing of note happened for the rest of Wednesday. We spent this day, and Tick went out to do something, and I planned on meeting up a girl I knew for a bit, and have a bit of adult time if you catch my drift. After my afternoon delight, I was feeling pretty damn good, and Tick called me over and said we should meet up at the cabin at the top of the mountain behind his house, and scout a good place to set up for the coyote this weekend. That cabin was old, built by his great-grandfather. There was an old outhouse inside. It was nestled in a small clearing in the woods at the top. 1 room, 1 door in, 1 window on each side. Small front porch with a table inside in the center, with 2 benches inside and 2 on the porch. So after my date, I left and grabbed my Glock, my civilian AK that I had. Yeah, I had one of those too, to accompany my AR, and quite a few others. A few mags, some water, my grinder, some papers, and an XD-45. I just had to, because why not be in the woods without 3 guns? I just really wanted to try it out, and because I hadn't yet, I was gonna carry guns I trusted until I could vet this one. It's about 6:30, and the sun is beginning to set, and no words from Tick, as I finally arrived at the cabin, which had been travelled to by foot. I should have heard from him by now, so I sat on the old bench on the old porch in the old cabin, and took my backpack off, and set it and my rifle at the entrance, to keep my Glock at my hip. I rolled the joint, and took a few takes before snuffing it out. Gotta save some for my friend, right? I'm not a dick. Anyway, darkness crept in while the sun faded out, and I was sitting there enjoying the nature, just waiting for either my phone to ring or to hear Tick holler out of the surrounding bush. But it was now 7:30. No Tick. Not like him to be late, or not call or something. When all of a sudden, I hear animals go crazy from all around. Great. I'm here in this creepy cabin in the woods. My phone's about to die with no flashlight, and it's dark, and here comes the weird shit again. So instead of sitting there, I pulled the 2 porch benches in front of the porch entrance. I blocked off the windows inside, and pulled a bench to the back of the table in the center of the cabin, and locked and loaded everything I had, and set my extra mags down on the table. I aimed my AK out of the doorway, and waited, because whatever was there Monday at my house had to be nearby, and it sounded huge then. Here I am alone. So again, cue the large, deep snarl growling, and silence. Dead silence. I felt like it was so quiet I could hear my blood flow. Thump, crunch, thump. Whatever it was stumping around the cabin, just inside of the darkness, so I couldn't see. Only way in is through the front door, and I've got 30 rounds of 7.62 x 39 ready for whatever tries, plus 3 extra mags and plenty of 9mm and a few 45s. So I'm thinking, walk around all you want, arsehole. You step into the light of this doorway and I will blow you in half. I didn't know which bullet I had here with its name on it, but I was going to keep shooting until I found out. Fear changed the focus to being anxious. I kept whispering, "Come on, come on, give me something," when my whispering was met with what sounded like it mimicking me, almost exactly as I was whispering. Were it not for sheer adrenaline at this point, I think I may have shat myself. At that moment, I felt as I had been in a standoff with this thing for hours. Must have been after midnight by now. My cell rang on the table, illuminating the cabin. 9:15 p.m. It was a call from Tick. I answered, putting it on speaker, with my non-trigger hand. "Hey bro, sorry I didn't call. You know, shit happens. Where are you?" he says. "I'm in the cabin, hurry up. Something's circling me, and it's big and sounds pissed, and I can't leave. You get here, don't be dumb. I'm blockaded in, I'm ready to shoot." I grumbled into the phone. "Shit. I'm gonna go get a spotlight. I'll be there soon," he replied. Finally, an hour later, after what seemed like an eternity of growls and whispers back and forth, of "come on, give me something," and circling the cabin just outside the moonlight in the darkness, Tick shows up with a spotlight and cuts through the darkness like a hot knife through butter. Duct taped to his AK-47 looked ridiculous, but I didn't care because the thing disappeared into the woods at the sight of the stream of light. Tick and I bounced over my shoulders the whole way, out of expecting a fight or something. Slept like shit that night. Now for the last occurrence. The sun comes up, and Tick says we should suit up and head into the woods. Find a spot for the coyote, and then look around to see what we could hunt. Remembering earlier when I said we'd suit up in vests and mics and stuff? Yeah, that's what he meant. Anyway, being reasonable like anyone who'd been to the woods before, I suited up with my friend and we headed into the woods in my best equipment. My vest, my Glock, my AR, and enough ammo for a small skirmish. And my friend the same, but an AK instead of an AR. Up the mountain we went. No signs of the beast. Nothing eventful. We found a good spot on this rock ledge, overlooking a clearing and a small pond. For the coyote though. It was almost nightfall, and we'd hit the valley on the other side of the mountain about a mile from railroad tracks, and 2 miles from any public road. The valley was pretty clear, except for the tall, waist-high grass. We weren't even paying attention before the sun was gone, and oddly enough, instead of animals going crazy this time, just dead silence, except for our banter back and forth. We hit the railroad tracks, not even caring about our surroundings, and just laughing and feeling untouchable. Easily enough to do so when you're armed, like some special ops team in the woodland environment that poses no threat. Normally, this weekend would have been far from normal, but we're not on full alert just yet. I guess a full sense of security had overtaken me. But anyway, on one side of the track was filled with dense brush and briars. The light on coming from the pylons on the top that had the flashing red light giving off barely enough light for anyone to see, but a backdrop not enough to see anything clearly with. We hear another deep snarl in the woods and see a silhouette between us and the red flashing light. It looked like a big-ass coyote, but it had a tail almost like a mountain lion or a big cat. Thick, long-curled, all the way to the end. A thick stench took over the once cleaner air. It stood there on all fours, seemingly kind of hunched, but it must have been 14 to 18 feet tall, in head, and what little light we could see. Then we saw the orange glow. The same glow we saw on Monday in the woods. Standing shoulder to shoulder, we took aim, and it stood down on these doggish-like leg arms to stabilize. Fingers unhumanly long, and clawed. It moved very jerkily, and tilted its head to the side, before what seemed like a runner would lean his direction before a race, and it leaned towards us. I fired 3 rounds center mass. The thing seemed unbiased. Tick said move more and cover, so I ran as he fired shots, and then I turned to see the thing lurching towards us, and seemingly to not gain or lose any ground between us with no effort. I fired and Tick ran, and vice versa. That was until it finally howled and shrieked and ran to the tall grass. We continued up the tracks, moving and covering one another until we hit the road. We made a phone call and got a ride out there. Now to this day I can't be sure of what it was, or if we really hit it, or it matrixed all our shots out of the way, because we're pretty damn proficient with firearms, but we also didn't know how to go back that far either. No longer past the cabin. No longer much after dark. I know there's still shit out there. If you've never experienced any of it, I see how it can be hard to believe, but if you search enough, you will see. This happened to me about 6 years ago. I was in a rough point in my life. I'd just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years, and my parents had kicked me out the house for abusing drugs. I'm gonna be honest, things weren't looking up for me, and I had been forced to live out by myself in a tent. Wallowing in my sorrow, I packed everything I could into my car and drove away. I was living deep in the woods, somewhere I didn't think anyone could find me. It was incredibly isolated, and in a way I was proud of just how alone I could be. It was good. It let me gather my thoughts. The trees, the nature, the tranquility of it all really helped put things into perspective. After a few days of living there, I started getting bored of it, and I started exploring the local area. It was creepy to say the least. There are a few interesting ruins of some kind. I'm not really sure what they were. Decayed stone structures from long ago. I was unsure if they were perhaps Native American, or maybe just an old town, and what was left of it, after so much decay. Either way, it was fun to just take everything in. Then, a few weeks later, something happened that made me change how I felt about staying in the woods. I'd already been there for a few months. I'd gotten used to driving into town, picking up a few groceries that wouldn't go horrible for the next day, and just chilling with the dog. Now the night in question, something very odd happened. I was just by the fire with my dog, and I think I hear something far off in the woods. Another dog is making a sound. It's a bit hard to discern at first, but being an animal lover, I decide to go investigate, as it's the first time I'd ever heard any other dogs in the woods. So I get up, and I see if my dog wants to come, but she's very happy where she is and stays. So closer I get. I listen. It definitely sounds like this dog is injured, so I up the pace and keep going to try and find the origin of this poor and helpless dog. I get closer, but there's something funny about the way the dog sounds. It's repetitive. I know it might sound a bit silly to say, but it's like every time I heard the noise, it would be the same in pitch, tone, length, consistency. It was almost as if it were being looped. It didn't seem genuine. I'd gone quite far, and at this point, I was starting to worry. Had someone found me? Was this part of a prank? I decided that I'd leave it, and made my way back to my fire pit. I could hear the dog still in the background for a while, but after about 15 minutes it stopped. I told myself that I'd go have a look in the morning, and that if I found a dead dog, I would be a really horrible person, but that if I found nothing, my suspicions were correct, and I could hold my head slightly higher than I was right now. Well, anyway, nightfall came. I was fast asleep in my tent when I hear something. Now, I'm quite a light sleeper, so I'm prone to waking up at any given noise. I open my eyes and don't see anything. So, I grab my flashlight and, with trepidation, slowly unzip the tent. I look around and see nothing. but I do see some tracks around my campsite. They don't look human, they're definitely animal, but it's enough to keep me on my toes. Just as I'm passing the flashlight through the tree line, I spot something. A pair of eyes. This pair of eyes, though, was standing at about 7 feet. I nearly crapped myself. What the hell could be this tall? That's when I started pointing the flashlight down. I wasn't really sure what I was looking at. It was dark. But from what I could make out, this thing had some really strange matted fur. And the further I looked, the more disturbing it was. It looked like a coyote or a dog of some kind that was standing on its front legs and just staring at me through the tree line. I was absolutely terrified and was hoping that I was just so tired I was imagining it. I moved the flashlight away out of instinct, and when I moved my flashlight back, it was gone. For one beautiful second, I genuinely thought it was in my mind, but the crashing of foliage through the trees that immediately followed that silence was horrifying. It wasn't something running through the forest. It was something galloping through it with purpose. I knew that the thing I'd seen had decided that it was gonna leave. But at that moment, I thought that maybe I should do the same. I had no idea what that thing was, and I certainly didn't want to wait and find out. Hesitantly, I backed everything up, scared that the thing would return. I didn't have much, so it didn't take long, and within 15 minutes, I drove away in my car, found a nice spot in a Walmart parking lot, and collapsed. The next morning, I was very, very on edge, and I went to speak with my parents and apologized, and they gave me another chance and said I could stay with them. I turned my life around after that, and now have a pretty good job and have moved out to a place of my own. I've also tried looking that creature up. There are a few things it could be, but whatever it is, all that I know is that I don't want to return to those woods. I just hope that it didn't follow me, and that I never have to encounter it again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. As I said at the start, I have opened a PO box. You can find the information in the description. Don't feel like you have to send me anything, but if you'd like to, feel free. It'll be really fun. And I might even do some videos of opening what you guys send me if I get enough stuff to do a video anyway. So yeah, if that happens, I'll be sure to do that. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as it does go a long way, and I really appreciate it. I do post new content every night, so be sure to subscribe and hit the little bell icon to be up to date every time I post, and to make sure you get your nightly spooks. If there's a story that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my Reddit page or my email, both of which you'll be able to find in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.